De Infinite W, Joel S. Goldsmith, de klas die Joel op 15 oktober 1959 in Holland gaf, de Holland Closed Class, 15 oktober 1959.
So far, we have had several points, several principles in the message of the infinite way, which are strange to most of you, although in most cases you will not yet recognize that. In other words, it takes quite a long while before you are able to perceive that you are working with principles with which you are not familiar. Probably one of the most important is that you are never using a power, not even a God power, at any time, nor are you ever seeking a God power at any time. And the reason is, God is, and you can't make that happen, and you can't stop that happening. You can't bring it about, and you can't prevent it. God is, and you can never influence God. If you were to pray from now until the stars fall out of the skies, you still could never influence God to give or to withhold, to do or not to do. God is infinite, and the wisdom of man is not great enough to enable him to direct or influence that which is already infinite divine intelligence, or that which is already divine love. The things of God are foolishness with man. Yes, and the things of man are foolishness with God. And therefore, for man to try to reach God, for man to try to influence God, for man to try in any way at all to make God do something, or to try to cause God to do something, or withhold something, or give something, is utterly ridiculous. It is as nonsensical as can be. God is the infinite intelligence of this universe. God is the divine wisdom, the divine love of this universe. And man can make himself receptive and responsive to the direction of God, but he cannot direct God. Man can make himself the servant of God, but never the master of God. Man can bring himself under the law of God, but he cannot make God do his will. So, to come to that place in consciousness which we call surrender or yielding, means to come to that place of recognition in which you really know that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Not that I must beg or plead or coerce, not that I must sacrifice, not that I must wear sackcloth and ashes, but the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Instead of trying in our problems to get the power of God to work for us, or to get the power of truth to work for us, we, in this message, reverse that. We realize that God already is, and that God already is functioning, that the grace of God already is my sufficiency, that the activity of God already is where I am. Therefore, the place whereon I stand is holy ground. Then, the overcoming of our problems has to do not with seeking to get God's influence to remove it or destroy it, but rather, ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. In other words, the overcoming of your problems has nothing to do with God. It has to do with ye knowing the truth. And the truth that you have to know is twofold, in two parts. The first truth that you must know is the nature of God as omnipresence, omniscience, omnipotence, here where I am. God is all that God is. I am all that the Father hath is mine. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Know ye not that ye are children of God, and if children, heirs of God, joint heir with Christ to all the heavenly riches? Then you must know that God, the infinite intelligence of this universe, the divine love of this universe, is performing its functions in your life, is maintaining and sustaining you in perfect harmony, in infinite abundance. God is, and God is where I am, and God is all that I am, and all that the Father hath is mine. Now, when you oh yes, one more. God being infinite, God is the only power. Now, you must remember that, because we will come back to that in another form in just a few minutes. God is the only power. For a long while, that statement is going to baffle you, puzzle you. That statement may make you very, very mad, because this is the point on which you have always agreed and never been able to prove. This is the point that in your heart and soul you really believe that God is the only power, and yet you have never been able to prove it. Oh, here and there perhaps, but not as a principle of life. God is the only power, and this you are going to remember a little later. Incidentally, God is the only lawgiver, therefore God is the only law. You're going to remember this later too, because while it would be very easy for you to agree with this right now and say, I believe you that God is the only law, later on you are not going to be so sure. And many times you're going to doubt this, but it's the point, the principle, which ultimately you must prove. God is the only power. God is the only law. Now, I'm going to give you the principle that will, in days to come, in the weeks and months to come, be the most difficult one for you to accept and to demonstrate. And yet, above all others, it is the one that will be necessary for you to know, to understand, to believe, and to demonstrate if you are to have the harmony in your life, and if you are to be able to bring harmony into the lives of others. And hear this well. God is spirit. Now you have declared this 10,000 times already in your life without knowing what it meant. Now listen well. God is spirit. God is infinite. God is infinite spirit. And now we go back to two former statements. God is power and God is law. And this means spiritual power is the only power there is. Spiritual law is the only law there is, if God is infinite. Now just think. What is it that the world is suffering from? Material law and mental law. If you could remove material law from the world and mental law from the world, there wouldn't be a discord on earth. Every discord of which you have ever heard and from which you have ever suffered had either a material or a mental basis. It was a law of matter or a law of mind. It was a power of matter or a power of mind. And never in your whole experience have you ever suffered from anything that didn't come under the heading of a material law, a material power, a mental law, or a mental power. And yet, we have just declared God is infinite, God is spirit, God is infinite spirit, God is power, God is infinite power, God is infinite spiritual power. God is law. God is infinite law. God is spiritual law. And this annihilates material and mental law as power. This annihilates material and mental power as power. It annihilates material and mental law as power, and says to you that neither of these is power, since God alone is power. God alone is law. There is only spiritual power and spiritual law. And if a law is not a spiritual law, it is not power. If a power is not spiritual power, it is not power. If a law is not spiritual law, it is not law. You do not know yet what it will mean to you as you begin to work on the problems of your life or the lives of those who come to you for help, to realize that you never have been faced with any problem that didn't involve either material power or material law or material or mental power or mental law. And yet, none of these is power or law. And the way that you bring out harmony is not by getting a God power to do something, but by realizing there is no power to do something to. There is no power to do something about. That which has been appearing in your life as a material power or material law, that which has been appearing in your life as a mental power or a mental law, is neither power nor law, for I alone am all. I alone am power. I alone am presence. I alone am the infinity of being. Is there any God beside me? And Isaiah answers, I know not any. Now, these are the principles you have been hearing so far in this classwork. And these are the principles with which you will have to work, not from the standpoint of using God, not from the standpoint of using truth, not from the standpoint of gaining a God power to do something for you, but from the standpoint of surrendering yourself into the realization that God alone is power, God alone is law. Yet, this will not suffice, because you will still be presented with these erroneous appearances. You will have the erroneous appearance of destructive weather, destructive germs, destructive powers of one kind or another, laws of heredity, laws of weather, laws of climate, the germ laws, laws of the calendar, age, change. You will still be faced with these until you take the next step, which is understanding the nature of these and why these cannot be power. At this point, I bring to your attention something that you must ponder for some time to come. You must think about. Be very sure that you do not confuse mental with spiritual, that you do not believe that these are the same thing, or that they have any relationship to each other. Be careful that you do not believe that the mental realm has anything to do with the spiritual realm, or that the mental realm even enters into the kingdom of God at all. Be very careful that you make as much distinction between the mental and spiritual as you already do between the material and spiritual. I'm sure that no one in this room believes that the material forces and powers of this world, or even the material substances of this world, have anything at all to do with the spiritual kingdom, or that they have any relationship to the spiritual kingdom. And yet, it may be possible that some of you still believe that there is a relationship between the mental and the spiritual, or that in some way they may even be the same. If you do, you subject yourself to worse errors than you have ever known before in all your life. You will be somewhat in the position of a minister in the United States, a Protestant minister, who found that he wasn't too interested in God, but he was interested in the laboratory and science. And in his studies, he came across something that he knew as a mental power. Now, since he had never known anything of Christian Science or unity, and only afterward became acquainted with New Thought, he didn't know that this subject was 75 or 85 years old, and that he wasn't pioneering. And he thought that all the work that he was doing was original with him. And so it was that he discovered, he thought, a very great secret. And that is that you can pray and make plants grow better, but that you could also pray and make them die. And so he experimented, and to his own satisfaction, he proved that prayer will increase the flowers in your garden, but if you would rather kill them, you can do it by praying them to death. And he really published a book on this subject, which has wide sale now, because he's lecturing on it and proving to his audiences that by prayer you can benefit somebody, or by prayer you can kill them. Now, of course, you know the mistake that he made. His experiments were all right, but he confused mental work with prayer. He confused mental treatment with good prayer, and mental malpractice with bad prayer. In fact, he said in his book that prayer correctly understood will destroy. Now, you know better than that, don't you? You don't believe that. No one here must believe that prayer will destroy. Why must you not believe that? Because prayer has to do with your relationship with God. You can't accept a God that would destroy your plants because you wanted them destroyed. Because the next step, you may want some relative destroyed. And then you'd pray to God and he would do that for you too. And of course you don't believe that. So what this man discovered was that which you know was discovered in Christian Science and Unity and New Thought as long ago as 80 or 85 or 90 years, and that is that if you, with your mind, know certain statements of truth, make affirmations of truth, that you can benefit either people or plants or animals. But if you know anything at all about the early days of Christian Science, you also know that it was discovered that the same person, by entertaining evil thoughts, can malpractice and cause ills or destruction. But not in her wildest days did Mrs. Eddy ever dream that anyone would call malpractice prayer. So this man, in his ignorance of a subject that he could have read about in any public library, has presented to the public a book teaching that prayer can be destructive. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing all of this to you is this. In the metaphysical world, there are still people who fear the power of the human mind. They fear the power of malpractice. And so, these people never will be free until, first of all, you understand the nature of the mind and then the nature of spirit or truth. And so, I am going to give you a rule which you must never forget. It must become the basis of your life. I know that you have never heard it before in metaphysics, but I can tell you with 30 years background, you must accept this as a law, and therefore on this you will be able to build your immunity from evil, whether of a material nature or a mental nature. Now listen, we have agreed that God is infinite, and therefore that God is the only power and the only law. We have agreed that God is spirit, therefore the only power there is spiritual power. The only law there is spiritual law. Now listen to this. Anything that is of a material or a mental nature is not power or law. Remember, nothing that is of a material or mental power, force, law, is power or law. In other words, they are not of God. Now this is the point. If they are of the material or the mental, they are not of God, and now you must ask me to prove this, so that when you go out of here tonight, you will have the key of harmony, of peace, of dominion. If a thing or thought is of the material universe, it can be good or evil. Do you fully understand that? If a thing is of this material universe, it can be good or evil. It can be used for good or evil. It can act as good or evil. Of course, you can't in this hour go through the whole history of the material universe, but you can remember this principle so that when you go home, you can begin to think of all the things in the material universe and follow how they are good or evil, or how they may be used for good or evil, or how they may have influences for good or evil, and then you will know that they are not of God. For God has nothing of good or evil nature. God has only spiritual being. Now we will take anything of the mental universe, and you will also find that everything in the mental universe can be used for good or evil. Thoughts can be good or evil. Thoughts can be used for good or evil. Thoughts can result in good or evil. And anything of which you can think can be applied, good and evil. Therefore it can't be of God. For God is spirit, and God is not good or evil. God is pure, absolute, infinite, eternal, immortal, intelligent being. Just like we may say that 2 times 2 is 4 is neither good nor evil. It is just a state of being. You may use it for good or evil, but you may use it for good or evil, but it itself, 2 times 2, is neither good nor evil. It is a state of being. H2O is neither good nor evil. It is water. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen is neither good nor evil. It is water. Using them in the material or mental realms, of course you can make them serve the purposes of good or evil. But the it itself, the law which is an emanation of God, is neither good nor evil. So it is. This minister is right. You can use mental powers to bless your plants or to wither them. You can use your mental powers to bless your home or to wither it. I'm sure you know there are enough homes that have been withered by the mental thoughts and beliefs and actions of individuals. A home in itself is like this home. It is neither good nor evil. It is a home. But the mental condition of those who live in it and the material acts of those who live in it could make this home heaven or hell. Home itself has no quality, but the very moment that you bring into it the mind of man or the body of man or the material forces and powers of the world, you can improve it or wreck it. But when an individual opens themselves to God's grace, then what happens is what is happening in this home now. Peace, joy, love, confidence, assurance, and healing. Because there is neither good nor evil, there is God's grace. And this is our sufficiency. It is a wholeness and a completeness and a perfection in itself. Therefore, whenever an individual gives up their right thinking and wrong thinking, their right doing and wrong doing, and surrenders themselves to God's grace, they become an instrument through which God appears on earth. And then it makes no difference whether they're in the spiritual ministry or whether they're living their lives in their homes. They are a blessing to everybody in the home. Not because they are good, not because they have overcome evil, but because they are neither trying to be good nor evil. They are letting the presence and power of God shine through. We do know that right thinking makes a good human being and wrong thinking can make a bad one, but neither one is godly. One is humanly good and the other is humanly bad, and the question of God doesn't enter. But an individual who is not trying to be humanly good or humanly bad, but who will open themselves, as we have been having in our lessons here, from waking in the morning until sleeping at night, surrendering ourselves for 2 or 3 minutes to the realization that God's grace is my sufficiency. God's grace governs my life. God's grace influences my actions. God's grace governs my thoughts. God's grace goes before me to make the crooked places straight. And then we are instruments through which God shines. We are neither good nor evil. The Master gave us that. Why callest thou me good? There is but one good, the Father in heaven. I of my own self can do nothing. It is the Father within me doing the works. And so there you have a man who was not a good man. And he frankly said so. He was an instrument for God, and no destruction could come through him. Only good, only spirit, only life, never death, never disease. And so our minister was wrong that destruction could come through a prayer that had to do with God. Nothing could come through the Master but life, never death. Wholeness, never disease. Purity, never sin. Not because he was good, but because he said, I am not good. The Father within me is my life, my mind, my soul, my being, and God alone is good. Now, when you come to the working out of problems, you're going to find that every problem that confronts you, whether it is yours, a member of your families, a patient or a student, every problem will either involve something that has to do with material force or material law, or something that has to do with mental force or mental law, and you then are going to be called upon not to ask God to destroy these, or remove them, or rise above them, but to sit in quietness and in confidence and realize, thank you, Father. God is spirit. The only power in heaven and earth is spiritual power. God is law. Therefore, the only law in heaven or on earth is spiritual law. That which the world calls material law or mental law is really only the arm of flesh or nothingness. It's really a belief in two powers. But there can't be two powers if God is infinite. Therefore, the only power is the infinite spiritual power of God, and the only law operating in my life is the infinite spiritual law, which is God. And then as you realize that, you are not only realizing the infinite, omnipresent nature of God's being, you are also realizing the absolute nothingness of the claim or appearance that is being presented to you. And then you sit for a few moments, speak, Lord, thy servant heareth, and into you will come a flow of something or other that will be an assurance to you that this is truth, and that this truth is now operating and is functioning. Always remember that even though there is no material law or power, even though there is no mental law or power, there will operate in human experience both material powers and laws, both mental powers and laws, because of the universal belief in two powers, until this belief hits up against the consciousness of an individual who knows the truth. And that individual, knowing the truth, makes you free. One with God is a majority. Where two or more are gathered together in my name, there is the very presence of this infinite good, and with 10 holy men in one city, the whole city can be saved. It only takes a 1 or 2 or 3 really to save a whole community. But they must be 1, 2, or 3 who are not praying to God to have God do something. They must be the 1, 2, or 3 who knows that God is, and beside God, all this material presence and power and law is not. And beside God, all this mental forces and powers and laws is not. It is only the arm of flesh, nothingness, a belief in two powers. And then with that resting back comes that inner assurance. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. God's grace indeed is thy sufficiency. As in heaven, so on earth. God's reign is now. As in heaven, so on earth, spiritual power is the only power. As in heaven, so on earth, spiritual law is the only law. As in heaven, so on earth, spiritual life is the only life. There's no such thing as young life or old life or middle life. There is only spiritual life, which is from everlasting to everlasting. The same yesterday, today, and forever. But you must know this truth in order to be free of the universal belief in two powers, two laws, two lives. Now, to bring a complete assurance to you that your footsteps will never stray from an inner conviction that you do not have to contact a God somewhere. You do not have to go somewhere. You do not even have to change your nature before harmony can come into your experience, so that you may know that where you are at any moment, this divine spiritual presence and power is functioning. I will ask you to remember all of these passages of Scripture and never let a day pass that at least some of these do not come back into your remembrance to give you the assurance, the confidence, the faith with which to carry on in the presence of seeming problems and difficulties until the promised land is reached. I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. Before Abraham was, I am with you. I will be with you unto the end of the world. My presence will go before you. My peace I give unto you. My grace is thy sufficiency. I am thy meat, and thy wine, and thy water, and thy bread. I am the staff of life unto you, and I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, and I will be with thee unto the end of the world. Where thou art, I am, and all that I have is thine. I am thy meat, the substance of thy being and thy body. And where thou art, I am, for I will never leave thee. I am thy wine, inspiration, truth, and I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I will be with thee as thy wine, as thy inspiration, unto the end of the world. Even if you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will walk there with you, and I will still be the only presence and the only power that goes before you to prepare heavenly mansions for you and to make the crooked places straight. I, in the midst of you, am mighty. I am the resurrection. And if for any reason this temple is destroyed, your body, your business, your home, your wealth, if any part of the temple of your life is destroyed, I am the resurrection that will build it up again. And I am closer to you than breathing. I am nearer than hands and feet. For I am thy very being. I am the law unto thy life. I am the guiding instinct. I am all in thee, closer to thee than breathing. I will never leave thee. If you mount up to heaven, I will go with you. If you are now making your bed in hell, I am there with you. And if you are walking temporarily through the valley of the shadow of death, I am there to raise you up. Fear not. Fear not. It is I. Fear not. Whatever the appearance may be, material nature or mental nature, material powers or mental powers, material laws or mental powers, fear not. It is I, and I am the only power. I am spiritual power, all law, all presence. I, in the midst of thee, am all this. And you'll find me up in heaven, and you'll find me in hell. You'll find me in the valley of the shadow of death, for I am thee. I am thy being. I am the substance of thy form. I made thee in the beginning in my image and likeness. I, in the midst of thee. Fear not what mortal man can do to thee. I, in the midst of thee, am more than all of these. Fear not material forces, powers, laws. Fear not mental forces, powers, laws. I alone am presence, power. I alone am. All else is illusion. All else is a belief in two powers. Therefore, nothing that has two powers has a law of God to support it or sustain it. Never forget that sentence. Nothing that has good and evil, nothing that can be used for good or evil, has a law of God to maintain it or sustain it. No belief in two powers is God ordained. No belief in two powers can be perpetuated. These constitute the arm of flesh temporal power, which is no power. The only power that material forces and laws or mental forces and laws have is the universal belief in two powers, and these will operate for good or evil until they reach the consciousness of one individual who has been taught this principle of I in the midst of thee am spirit, and I am the only law, the only power, and all else beside me is nothingness. One with this truth is a majority to all of the claims of the flesh. So remember, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And the truth is that whatever it is that is of the nature of good and evil is not power, is not law, has no God being to maintain or to sustain. Newspaper a couple of days ago in England, a reporter was investigating the subject of these common colds that afflict people at this time of the year, and he went to a man famous in his field to ask if any progress was being made in the discovery of remedies for the common cold. And the doctor said frankly, no progress had been made. And this reporter said, what about these injections of vaccines for cold? I hear that they are helpful. And the doctor said, yes, they are. He said, we have found that where people have injections of vaccines for against these colds, that whereas they might usually have 3 colds in a winter, they only have 2 after that. And the reporter said, well, that's progress, isn't it? He said, yes, it is. But he said, the strange thing is that we found out with an equal number of people that if we gave them an injection of water, they also only had 2 colds instead of 3. There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. There is nothing in and of itself that is evil unless it can be made so. In Hawaii, in the days before the missionaries came there, the Hawaiians, like most primitive races, knew the secrets of the mind. And so they had a form of religious life which is called kahunaism. That is, the kahuna is what we would call a priest. But there are good kahunas and bad kahunas. So you can go to a good kahuna and get blessed, and if you are ill, you can be made well. And if you're poor, you can be made more prosperous. If fishing isn't good, you will have more fish in your nets. All good things can come to you through the good kahuna, but there is also an evil kahuna. And if you have a man or woman you don't like, you can go to the evil kahuna and have them killed. Now, of course, it is actually true that the good kahuna did bless and heal and prosper. But it is equally true that the bad kahuna did kill. He did have that power. Well, one day, a man whom I came to know very, very well told me this story. Some former friend of his became an enemy, and not being able to get the best of this deal in any way, he went to a bad kahuna to have this man, my friend, killed. But 2 or 3 days went by, and my friend didn't die. And this other man became a little worried about it and called on him and sort of had a little talk with him to see if the man wasn't feeling a little bit ill or a little bit weak. No, he was feeling fine. Well, he couldn't quite understand it. And then this man said, "Oh, have you been to a kahuna about me?" "Well, yes." Oh, he laughed. This man said, "Don't laugh. Don't laugh. You'll surely die." He still laughed. But when a few days went by, this man didn't die. The other man went to the kahuna and told him about it. And the kahuna said, "Is this man a full-blooded Hawaiian?" "Oh, no," he said, "he's half Hawaiian, half Chinese." "Oh," he said, "that's why. You see, it doesn't work on a half Hawaiian and half Chinese." Do you see the reason? The Hawaiian is brought up from birth to fear the power of mental malpractice. And the moment he knows it is being used against him, he trembles. And certainly, eventually, he dies from fright. But this half Hawaiian, half Chinese, he was never taught that. He didn't believe it. It had no power on him. So nothing is good or bad in the mental realm or physical realm unless you can be made to believe that God isn't the only power. But the very moment that you begin to perceive not only that God is spirit, and God is law, and God is spiritual law, therefore I need not fear material power, material law, mental power, mental law. You not only have that for an assurance, but something quite startling. This God power and God law is in the midst of me. It doesn't have to be found or discovered or be worthy of. It is planted in the middle of me since before Abraham was. Closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. The kingdom of this God, of this power, is within you. Whether you're in heaven or hell, whether you're in life or in the valley of the shadow of death, it walks with you. You can't go any place and leave it behind you. You can't be in any place where it isn't, because if you are there, it is there. For its kingdom is within you. And therefore, the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Where I am, thou art. Where thou art, I am. Why? Because I and my Father are one and not two. We are inseparable and indivisible. You can no more divide God and man than you can divide the number one and tear it apart from itself. No matter what you have, it's always the same one that's there. One is one, inseparable and indivisible. One is one. And I and my Father constitute that one. Therefore, where I am, God is. Where God is, I am. And this spiritual power and this spiritual law which we have just declared, it is in the midst of you. And you need not go to holy mountains. You need not go to holy temples. The place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Do you see what principles we are dealing with in the infinite way, and why you must know this truth, and know it so specifically, so consciously, so constantly, that you have this word in the midst of you at all the time? For the Master said, if you do not live in the word, and let the word live in you, you will be as a branch of a tree that is cut off and withereth. And it won't be because there are any powers, and it won't be because there are any laws. It will be because you have cut yourself off from the only power and the only law by not abiding in the Word and letting the Word abide in you. The 91st Psalm recognized that when it said, he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High, none of these evils of earth, physical or mental, shall come nigh his dwelling place. And the Master said, if you abide in this word, if you let this word abide in you, you will bear fruit richly. Therefore, ye must know the truth, in order that ye may be made free and maintained free. And never let this word pass from your consciousness, and never let your consciousness forget or drop this word. As the ancient Hebrew said, place it up here on your forehead, bind it on your arms, keep it so close to you that never can you forget that in the midst of you, and I in the midst of me, am that one. Thank you.